The evening air was thick with expensive perfume and the sound of clinking champagne glasses. Inside the grand ballroom of the Palazzo Estrella, everything sparkled. The chandeliers hanging from the ceiling looked like frozen waterfalls made of diamonds, casting warm golden light on everyone below. This wasn't just any party. This was one of those events where you needed to be someone important just to get through the door. Women glided across the marble floors in gowns that cost more than most people make in a year. Their jewelry caught the light with every movement, sending little rainbows dancing across the walls. The men wore tuxedos so perfectly tailored they looked like they were born in them. Everyone here had money, lots of it, the kind of money that opens doors and makes problems disappear. The charity gala happened once a year, and it was always the talk of the town for weeks afterward. Business tycoons mingled with old money families. Politicians laughed at jokes told by real estate moguls. Famous surgeons chatted with tech entrepreneurs. It was the kind of crowd where a casual conversation could turn into a million-dollar deal before dessert was served. Moving quietly through this sea of wealth was a young woman who didn't belong to their world. Her name was Maria Gonzalez, and she was 26 years old. While everyone else wore silk and satin, she wore the simple black uniform of the serving staff. White collar, black vest, comfortable shoes that wouldn't make noise on the marble. She had been working at the Palazzo Estrella for 3 years now, and she knew the routine by heart. Maria moved between the tables with practiced grace, refilling water glasses before anyone noticed they were empty, clearing away plates so smoothly that guests barely registered her presence. That was the job, really. Be invisible. Be helpful. Don't interrupt the important people and their important conversations. She had learned early on that the staff were like furniture to most of these guests. Useful, necessary, but not really worth noticing as actual human beings. She didn't mind it most days. The pay was decent, better than other serving jobs in the city. The tips at events like this could be generous when someone was in a good mood and wanted to show off. She needed the money. Her family needed the money. That was reality, and Maria had made peace with it a long time ago. But tonight something was different. Tonight, there was a piano. The Steinway grand piano sat on the stage at the front of the ballroom like a sleeping giant. Its polished black surface reflected the chandelier light, and even from across the room, Maria could see how beautiful it was. This wasn't some cheap keyboard or an old upright shoved in a corner. This was a real concert piano, the kind that professional musicians dreamed of playing. Every time Maria passed near the stage, her eyes went to that piano. Her fingers would twitch slightly, unconsciously mimicking movements she had practiced thousands of times. She caught herself doing it and quickly grabbed another tray of champagne flutes, trying to focus on her work. The thing was, there was supposed to be a pianist tonight, some fancy musician who performed at all the high society events. Maria had heard the other servers talking about it during setup. The guests were expecting live music, something classy to accompany their 7-course meal and their conversations about vacation homes and investment portfolios. But the pianist had canceled. Some emergency, someone said. A family matter, according to another rumor. Whatever the reason, he wasn't coming, and he had canceled too late for the organizers to find a replacement. So instead of live music filling the ballroom with something beautiful, there was just a recorded playlist coming through the speakers. Classical music, sure, but it sounded flat and lifeless compared to what a real person could do with that magnificent piano. The guests didn't seem to care much. Most of them probably couldn't tell the difference between a recording and a live performance anyway. They were too busy talking about their latest business ventures, their children's acceptance to prestigious universities, their upcoming trips to Europe or Asia. The music was just background noise to them, but to Maria, that unused piano felt like a crime. She had been playing piano since she was 7 years old. Her grandmother had taught her back before everything got complicated, back when life felt full of possibility. Her abuela had been a real pianist once, a concert performer in their home country before the family immigrated. She had beautiful hands, Maria remembered, with long fingers that danced across the keys like they were having a conversation with the music itself. Those lessons in her grandmother's tiny living room had been the best part of Maria's childhood. While other kids played outside, she sat at the old upright piano, learning scales and arpeggios, discovering Chopin and Mozart and Beethoven. Her grandmother would sit beside her, correcting her posture, showing her how to bring emotion into the notes, teaching her that music wasn't just about playing the right keys at the right time. It was about feeling something and sharing that feeling with anyone who would listen. Maria had dreamed of going to a real music school. She had imagined herself at a conservatory, spending her days practicing and learning from master teachers, maybe even performing in concerts someday. Nothing too grand, nothing too ambitious. She just wanted to make music, to spend her life doing the things she loved most. But dreams and reality don't always match up. Her grandmother got sick. Medical bills piled up faster than anyone in the family could count. Her father's construction work wasn't steady enough. Her mother cleaned houses, but it wasn't enough. Maria finished high school and started looking for work instead of college applications. The conservatory dream got folded up and tucked away in a drawer somewhere, along with all the other things that belonged to a different version of her life. She still played, though. She had bought a cheap electronic keyboard at a pawn shop, and it sat in her tiny studio apartment, squeezed between her bed and the kitchenette. Most nights after her shift ended and she finally made it home around midnight, she would practice for an hour before collapsing into bed. The keyboard wasn't the same as a real piano. The keys felt wrong, plastic, and light. The sound came through a tinny speaker that couldn't capture the richness of actual strings and hammers. But it was what she had, and she played it like it was a Steinway. Her neighbors probably hated her, but she kept the volume low and used headphones most of the time. Music was the only thing that felt like hers anymore. Everything else in her life belonged to necessity, to bills and responsibilities and other people's needs. But when she sat at that keyboard, for just a little while, she got to be herself again. Now, in this ballroom full of people who had everything, she couldn't stop looking at that beautiful piano. It seemed wrong somehow that it just sat there silent while a recording played through speakers. That instrument was made to be played, to be touched, to be brought to life by human hands. Instead, it was just a decoration, pretty to look at, but serving no real purpose. Maria shook her head and picked up another tray. She needed to focus. This wasn't her world, and that wasn't her piano. She was here to work, to serve drinks and smile politely and earn her pay. The sooner she accepted that, the sooner she could get through the rest of the evening. But as she turned back toward the crowd, she caught sight of the piano one more time. Just for a second, she let herself imagine what it would feel like to sit at that bench, to place her hands on those keys, to fill this enormous room with music instead of just recorded sound. It was a nice dream, even if that's all it would ever be. The dinner service went on for what felt like forever. Course after course came out of the kitchen, each one more elaborate than the last. Maria and the other servers moved in careful choreography, delivering plates and removing them at exactly the right moments. Her feet were starting to hurt despite the comfortable shoes, and her cheeks ached from maintaining that professional smile for hours. She was carrying a tray of empty dessert plates back toward the kitchen when she heard two of the organizers talking near the stage. They were trying to keep their voices low, but Maria was close enough to catch the conversation. "This recorded music is just awful," one woman said, shaking her head. She was older, maybe in her 60s, wearing a deep blue gown that probably cost more than Maria's car. "The whole atmosphere feels cheap. Victor was supposed to be here, and now we're stuck with this." "There's nothing we can do about it now," the other organizer replied, sounding tired. "We've already apologized to half the room. At least the food is excellent. The donors expect better than this. We charge $10,000 per seat, and we can't even provide live entertainment. Maria slipped past them and continued toward the kitchen. $10,000 per seat. She tried to imagine having that kind of money to spend on a single dinner. It was more than she made in 4 months. These people lived in a completely different universe. After dropping off the dishes, she was told to take a short break. The main dinner service was over, and they'd only need servers for drinks and coffee for the next little while. Maria grabbed a bottle of water and stepped into the small hallway behind the ballroom where the staff could catch their breath away from the guests. But she didn't feel like sitting in the break room with the other servers. Her mind kept wandering back to that piano. She found herself walking back toward the ballroom, entering through a side door that put her near the stage. The guests were all mingling now, moving around the room in small groups, their voices creating a constant hum of conversation. Nobody was paying attention to the stage. Nobody was looking at the piano. Maria stood there, partially hidden by one of the tall floral arrangements, just staring at it. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Music is meant to be shared, mija," she used to say. "Keeping it locked up inside you is like putting a bird in a cage. It needs to fly free." Her fingers moved again, that unconscious mimicking of the keys. She imagined sitting at that bench, feeling the weight of real piano keys under her hands instead of the plastic keyboard at home. What would it sound like in this huge room with its high ceilings and perfect acoustics? How would it feel to play something real, something beautiful in a space like this? "You keep looking at that piano." Maria jumped, nearly dropping her water bottle. She turned to find the woman in the blue gown standing beside her, the same one who had been complaining about the recorded music. Up close, Maria could see the kind lines around her eyes, the elegant gray in her hair, the warmth in her expression. "I'm sorry, señora," Maria said quickly, straightening up and trying to look professional. "I was just taking a moment before going back to work." "Don't apologize," the woman said, waving a hand dismissively. "I'm Isabella Cortez. I'm one of the people who organized this whole event." She looked at the piano, then back at Maria with curious eyes. "You weren't just looking at it, though. Your hands were moving, like you were playing something." Maria felt her face grow hot. She'd been caught daydreaming like a child. "I'm sorry, Señora Cortez. I didn't mean to—" "Do you play?" Isabella interrupted, her voice gentle but direct. The question hung in the air between them. Maria could have lied. Should have lied, probably. Said no and gone back to refilling water glasses. But something in the woman's face made her tell the truth instead. "Yes," she said quietly. "I've been playing since I was 7. Isabella's eyebrows rose with interest. "Really? Where did you study?" "I didn't study anywhere formal," Maria admitted, feeling self-conscious. "My grandmother taught me. She was a concert pianist before she came to this country. She taught me everything she knew." "And you still play?" "Every night, when I get home from work. I have a keyboard in my apartment. It's not the same as a real piano, but it's what I have." Isabella was quiet for a moment, looking between Maria and the piano with a thoughtful expression. Then she smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made Maria nervous because it looked like the woman was getting an idea. "That piano has been sitting there all evening, completely silent," Isabella said. "Our pianist canceled, and we couldn't find a replacement on such short notice. Everyone here paid good money to attend this gala, and they're getting recordings instead of real music." She paused. "Can you actually play well, or are you just learning?" Maria's heart started beating faster. She knew where this was going, and part of her wanted to run away. But another part, the part that had been staring at that piano all night, spoke up instead. "I can play," she said, and her voice was steadier than she expected. "Not just simple songs, real pieces, classical music mostly. That's what my grandmother taught me. Show me your hands. Maria held them out, confused. Isabella took them gently, examining her fingers like a doctor might. Piano hands, she said with satisfaction. Long fingers, strong but flexible. She let go and looked Maria directly in the eyes. Would you be willing to play for us tonight? The question hit like a physical force. Maria's mind went blank for a second, then filled with 1,000 thoughts all at once. Play? Here? In front of all these people? She looked down at her server's uniform, then at the crowd of millionaires in their designer clothes. I don't think that's a good idea, Senora, she managed to say. I'm working, and I'm not dressed for performing. And these people, they probably expect someone professional, someone famous. These people expect good music, Isabella cut in firmly. They don't care where it comes from as long as it's beautiful. And that piano deserves to be played by someone who loves it, not just someone we hired. She softened her tone. I've been running these events for 20 years. You know what the problem is? Everything feels fake. Hired entertainment, polite conversations that don't mean anything, people writing checks just to be seen doing it. But real talent, real passion, when you find that, it actually means something. Maria's throat felt tight. This was insane. This was the kind of thing that happened in movies, not real life. She was a server, not a performer. What if she messed up? What if she forgot a piece halfway through? What if everyone laughed at her? But what if she didn't mess up? I'm scared, she admitted honestly. Isabella smiled again, this time with understanding. Good. That means it matters to you. The best musicians are always a little scared before they perform. It keeps them sharp. She gestured toward the piano. That instrument has been silent all night. You have the chance to give it a voice. What do you say? Maria looked at the piano one more time. She thought about her grandmother, about all those hours of practice in that tiny living room. She thought about the cheap keyboard in her apartment and all the nights she'd played it, wishing for something more. She thought about that drawer where she'd tucked away her dreams of music school. Maybe this was crazy. Maybe she'd regret it. But maybe, just maybe, this was one of those moments that doesn't come around twice. Okay, she heard herself say. I'll do it. Isabella's face lit up with genuine delight. Wonderful. Wait here for just a moment. I need to talk to the sound engineer and let the other organizers know. We'll stop the recorded music and make a small announcement. Don't go anywhere. She hurried off, moving surprisingly fast for someone in a long gown and heels. Maria stood there, her water bottle clutched in her hands, trying to process what she'd just agreed to. Her legs felt shaky, her palms were sweating. She was actually going to do this. She was going to walk onto that stage, sit at that beautiful piano, and play in front of hundreds of wealthy strangers who probably knew more about fine music than she ever would. The smart thing would be to run, to slip out the side door and hide in the break room until her shift ended. But Maria had spent 3 years being invisible in rooms like this. 3 years watching other people live the kind of life she'd dreamed about. 3 years playing a plastic keyboard instead of a real piano. Just this once, maybe she could stop being invisible. Just this once, maybe she could be the person her grandmother had believed she could become. She set down her water bottle and flexed her fingers, preparing them. Her heart was hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. But underneath the fear, there was something else growing. Excitement, hope, and the wild, terrifying possibility that everything was about to change. The next few minutes passed in a blur. Maria watched as Isabella moved through the crowd, speaking urgently to different people. The sound engineer, the event coordinator, a few other organizers who looked surprised but intrigued by whatever Isabella was telling them. Then the recorded music stopped. The sudden silence made several guests look up from their conversations, confused. One of the organizers walked onto the stage with a microphone, and gradually the room quieted down as people realized something was about to happen. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment," the man said, his voice smooth and practiced. "As many of you noticed, our scheduled pianist was unable to join us this evening. However, we've had a wonderful stroke of luck. We have a talented musician here with us tonight who has graciously agreed to perform for us. Please join me in welcoming her to the stage." He gestured toward where Maria stood, and suddenly every eye in the ballroom turned to look at her. Her stomach dropped. This was real. This was actually happening. Isabella appeared beside her, gently touching her elbow. "Go on," she whispered encouragingly. "You've got this." Maria's legs felt like they were made of wood as she walked toward the stage. She was hyper-aware of everything. The sound of her shoes on the marble floor. The whispers starting to ripple through the crowd as people noticed her server's uniform. The weight of all those stares pressing down on her. She climbed the 3 steps to the stage, and the distance to the piano felt like a mile. She could hear the whispers more clearly now. Not mean exactly, but definitely skeptical. "Is that one of the servers? What is this supposed to be? I didn't pay $10,000 to be entertained by the help." That last comment stung, but Maria kept walking. She reached the piano bench and sat down carefully, adjusting her position the way her grandmother had taught her. "Posture matters, mija. The music flows through your whole body, not just your hands." The spotlight above the stage suddenly came on, bathing her in bright white light. She could barely see the audience now, which was somehow both better and worse. Better because she couldn't see their doubtful expressions. Worse because her imagination could fill in the blanks with even harsher judgment. Her hands were shaking as she placed them on the keys. The piano felt different from anything she'd ever touched before. The keys had a perfect weight to them, responsive but solid. Real ivory, probably. She pressed one key gently, and the note that came out was pure and rich, filling the space in a way her electronic keyboard never could. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then another. Her grandmother's voice came to her across the years. "When you're nervous, find the music inside you first. Feel it in your heart before you let it out through your fingers." Maria thought about what to play. She'd been practicing a Mozart sonata lately, but that felt too light for this moment. Beethoven? Too aggressive. She needed something that would catch their attention immediately, something beautiful enough to make them forget she was wearing a server's uniform. Chopin. She would start with Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It was one of the first serious pieces her grandmother had taught her, and she knew it so well she could play it in her sleep. More importantly, it was the kind of music that could break your heart if you played it right. Delicate and powerful at the same time. She found the first notes in her mind, felt the opening phrase before she played it. Then her fingers touched the keys, and the music began. The first notes floated out into the ballroom like a whisper, so soft that people had to stop talking to hear it. That was intentional. Her grandmother had taught her that sometimes the quietest sounds are the most commanding. Make them come to you instead of shouting at them. The melody unfolded gently, each note placed with care. Maria's nervousness started to fade as the music took over. This was familiar territory. This was home. It didn't matter that she was on a stage or that hundreds of wealthy strangers were watching. Right now, in this moment, it was just her and the piano having a conversation. Her fingers moved across the keys with growing confidence. The piano responded beautifully to every touch, every subtle change in pressure. She could shape the dynamics in ways she never could on her cheap keyboard. The soft passages were whisper quiet. The louder sections bloomed with warmth without ever becoming harsh. She'd played this piece hundreds of times, but never like this. Never on an instrument this fine, Never in a room with acoustics this perfect. The sound wrapped around her like a warm blanket. She could feel the music resonating through the piano bench, through her whole body. The conversations in the ballroom had stopped completely. Maria was too lost in the music to notice, but if she had opened her eyes, she would have seen the transformation happening in the audience. The skeptical expressions were fading. People who had been checking their phones were putting them away. Champagne glasses that had been raised to lips were being slowly lowered, forgotten. One elderly woman near the front, wearing enough diamonds to fund a small country, had her hand pressed to her chest. Her eyes were closed, and tears were sliding down her carefully made-up face. A businessman who had spent the entire evening talking about quarterly profits had gone completely silent, his mouth slightly open in surprise. Maria reached the middle section of the nocturne, where the melody becomes more complex, where Chopin's genius really shows itself. Her left hand maintained the steady, rocking rhythm, while her right hand wove the melody above it, the two voices dancing around each other but never quite touching. This was the part where you had to let yourself feel the music, not just play it. Her grandmother used to say that Chopin wrote homesickness into his nocturnes, the longing for something you can't quite name, the sweetness of memories mixed with the pain of loss. Maria understood that feeling. She'd been living it for years, longing for a life she couldn't have, missing opportunities that had passed her by. She poured all of that into the music. Every night spent at her cheap keyboard wishing it was a real piano. Every time she'd watched other people live the dreams she'd given up. Every moment she'd felt invisible, like she didn't matter because she was just a server, just someone in the background of other people's important lives. The music swelled, reaching toward a climactic moment, then pulling back again, becoming tender. It was like watching the sun set and not wanting it to end, knowing it has to, but wishing you could hold on to the light just a little longer. People in the audience were moving closer to the stage now, drawn by something they couldn't quite explain. This wasn't just technically proficient playing. This was something else. This was real emotion being channeled through fingers and keys and strings, becoming sound that reached directly into the chest and squeezed the heart. A famous music critic who attended the gala every year stood with his arms crossed, his analytical mind trying to process what he was hearing. He'd heard countless pianists, including some of the most celebrated performers in the world, but there was something raw and honest about this performance that he rarely encountered anymore. Professional musicians were often too polished, too concerned with technique to really let themselves be vulnerable in their playing. This young woman in a server's uniform was playing like she had nothing to lose and everything to prove. Like the music mattered more than impressing anyone, and somehow, paradoxically, that made it even more impressive. Maria approached the final section of the nocturne. This was where it had to be perfect, where the melody returns one last time like a bittersweet memory, beautiful but tinged with sadness, because you know it's ending. Her fingers found exactly the right touch, not too soft, not too bold, just honest. The last notes hung in the air, fading slowly into silence. Maria held her hands on the keys for a moment after the sound had died away, not wanting to break the spell. Her heart was pounding, but for a different reason now. Not from fear, but from the sheer joy of having played something real on an instrument worthy of the music. She finally opened her eyes and lifted her hands from the keys. For a moment, there was absolute silence in the ballroom. Not a single person moved. Maria's heart sank. Had she done something wrong? Had they hated it? Then the ballroom erupted. The applause started somewhere near the front and spread like wildfire through the crowd. It wasn't polite charity gala clapping. It was real, thunderous applause. People were standing up, dozens of them, then hundreds. A standing ovation. For her. Maria sat frozen on the piano bench, unable to process what was happening. Tears started streaming down her face before she could stop them. She'd imagined playing in front of people before, in her daydreams, but she'd never imagined this. This overwhelming response, this validation of everything she'd worked for in secret for so many years. Isabella was standing near the stage, clapping with her hands raised high, her face radiating pure joy. Other guests were still applauding, some of them shouting, "Brava!" The elderly woman with all the diamonds was on her feet, clapping so hard her jewelry sparkled in the light. But Maria barely saw any of them. All she could think about was her grandmother, wishing desperately that she could be here to see this moment. To know that her lessons, her patience, her belief that music was worth pursuing even when life got hard, all of it had led to this. The applause went on and on. Maria finally stood up on shaky legs, not sure what to do. Someone in the crowd shouted, "More! Play something else!" Others took up the call. "Yes, another piece!" Maria looked at Isabella, who was nodding enthusiastically, encouraging her. She looked at the piano, this beautiful instrument that had given voice to something she'd kept locked inside for so long. And she realized something. She wasn't invisible anymore. Maria wiped the tears from her face with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself. The applause was finally starting to die down, but people were still calling for more. She'd never played in front of an audience before, and now they wanted her to keep going. Part of her couldn't believe this was real. She sat back down at the piano, her confidence growing with each passing second. If they wanted more, she would give them more. But this time, she wouldn't play it safe. This time, she'd play something that would show them what she could really do. Rachmaninoff, the Prelude in C-sharp minor. It was one of the most technically demanding pieces she knew, full of thundering chords and dramatic passages. Her grandmother used to call it the piece that announces you've arrived. It was bold. It was powerful. And it was risky to attempt on an unfamiliar piano in front of this crowd. But Maria was done playing it safe. Her hands came down on the opening chords like a declaration. The sound that burst from the piano was huge, filling every corner of the ballroom. It wasn't gentle like the Chopin. This was music that demanded attention, that grabbed you by the shoulders and refused to let go. The crowd, which had been settling back into their seats, froze. This was completely different from the first piece. Where the nocturne had been intimate and tender, this was fierce and uncompromising. Maria's fingers flew across the keys, attacking the rapid passages with precision while still maintaining the emotional weight beneath the notes. The middle section arrived with its haunting bell-like melody. Maria let it ring out, each note clear and distinct, creating an almost hypnotic effect. She could feel the piano responding to her every intention, the instrument becoming an extension of her thoughts and feelings. An older gentleman standing near the back of the crowd leaned toward his companion. "Who is this girl?" he whispered urgently. "Where has she been hiding?" His companion, a woman who owned several art galleries, shook her head in amazement. "I have no idea, but someone needs to find out." The piece built toward its climactic ending, the chords becoming more forceful, more insistent. Maria's whole body was involved now, swaying with the music, her shoulders moving as she threw her weight into the powerful bass notes. This wasn't just playing, this was storytelling, this was rage and triumph and determination all mixed together. The final chords crashed through the ballroom like thunder. Maria held them, letting them ring until they faded into nothing. Then she lifted her hands from the keys, and the room exploded again. This time, the applause was even louder. People were shouting, whistling. Several guests were openly crying. The elderly woman with the diamonds was clapping so enthusiastically that her husband had to steady her to keep her from losing her balance. But something else was happening, too. People were moving toward the stage now, not just applauding from their tables. A man in an expensive suit was pushing through the crowd, his face intense and purposeful. Behind him, others followed. a woman in a red dress, a distinguished-looking man with silver hair. They all had that same expression, like they'd just witnessed something important and needed to be part of it. Maria stood up from the piano bench, overwhelmed and a little frightened by the crowd advancing toward the stage. What did they want? What was happening? Isabella reached the stage first, climbing up with surprising agility for someone in heels. She grabbed Maria's hands, her eyes shining with emotion. "That was extraordinary," she said, her voice thick. "Truly extraordinary." The man in the expensive suit was right behind her. He had sharp eyes and moved with the kind of confidence that came from years of being listened to. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Excuse me, young lady. I need to speak with you." Maria looked at him nervously. "I'm sorry. I should probably get back to work." "My name is Vicente Alvarez," he interrupted, and several people nearby gasped. "I'm the director of the National Conservatory of Music." Maria's heart stopped. She knew that name. Every serious music student in the country knew that name. The National Conservatory was the most prestigious music school for hundreds of miles. Getting accepted there was like winning the lottery. Getting to study under Vicente Alvarez himself was the kind of opportunity people dreamed about their entire lives. "Where did you study?" he demanded, though his tone wasn't harsh. It was the voice of someone who needed answers immediately. "Who was your teacher? Why haven't I heard of you before?" Maria's mouth felt dry. I didn't study anywhere formal, senor. My grandmother taught me. She was a pianist before she immigrated here. I've just been practicing on my own." Vicente's eyes widened. "You're self-taught? That's impossible. The technique I just witnessed doesn't come from practicing alone. The interpretation, the emotional depth, that's conservatory-level work." "My grandmother was very good," Maria said quietly. "She taught me everything she knew, and I practice every night after my shifts end. I've been playing for almost 20 years. "On what instrument?" another voice asked. Maria turned to see an elegant woman in her 50s wearing a red dress that matched her lipstick perfectly. "What do you practice on?" "An electronic keyboard," Maria admitted, feeling suddenly embarrassed. "I bought it used. It was all I could afford." The silence that followed was heavy with shock. Vicente looked like someone had slapped him. "You played like that? And you practice on an electronic keyboard?" He turned to the woman in the red dress. "Teresa, are you hearing this?" Teresa, who Maria would later learn was one of the country's most respected music patrons, stepped closer. "Young lady, what's your name?" "Maria. Maria Gonzalez." "Maria, let me make sure I understand this correctly. You've never had formal training. You work here as a server. You practice on a keyboard in your apartment. And you just played two of the most demanding pieces in the classical repertoire like you've been performing in concert halls your entire life." Put that way, it did sound unbelievable. Maria nodded slowly. "That's not normal talent," Teresa said, her voice firm. "That's exceptional. That's once in a generation." She looked at Vicente. "You're thinking what I'm thinking." "Full scholarship," Vicente said immediately. "We need to get her into the conservatory, tomorrow if possible. She's already years behind where she should be." Maria felt dizzy. "I'm sorry, what?" "A scholarship," Vicente repeated, speaking more slowly now, like he was trying to make sure she understood. "Full tuition, all expenses paid. You would study at the conservatory, work with our best instructors. We would get you caught up on music theory, composition, performance technique. With your natural ability and the foundation you already have, you could be performing professionally within a few years." "But I have to work," Maria stammered. "I have bills. My family needs help with—" "We'll figure that out," Teresa interrupted, pulling out her phone. "I fund scholarships for promising artists. Living expenses, instrument costs, whatever you need. You can't keep serving tables when you have this kind of gift. It's a waste. More people were gathering now, overhearing the conversation. The businessman, who had been talking about quarterly profits all evening, stepped forward. Put me down for whatever she needs, too. I'll contribute to the fund. Same here, said another voice. I'll match whatever Teresa commits, said someone else. Maria looked around in disbelief as wealthy strangers started offering money, making promises, pulling out business cards. It was like a dam had broken, and everything she'd ever wanted was flooding toward her all at once. It was too much, too fast. She couldn't process it. A younger man pushed through the crowd, probably in his 30s, wearing an expensive watch and an excited expression. I run a recording label, he said quickly. Independent, specializing in classical music. We need to talk about making an album. Your story, your talent, people would eat this up. The server who turned out to be a prodigy? That's incredible. She's not a circus act, Raphael, Teresa said sharply. She's an artist. I'm not suggesting exploitation, Raphael defended himself. I'm suggesting we share her gift with the world. Isn't that the point? They were talking about her like she wasn't standing right there. Maria's head was spinning. An hour ago, she'd been refilling water glasses, invisible to everyone in this room. Now, they were fighting over who got to help her, planning her future without even asking what she wanted. Please, she said, but her voice was too quiet, and nobody heard her over the arguing. Please, she said louder, and the crowd went silent. This is all very kind, and I'm grateful, I really am. But I need a minute to think. This is a lot to take in. Vicente's expression softened. Of course. I apologize. We're overwhelming you. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a card. This has my direct number. Call me tomorrow or the next day whenever you're ready. But Maria, please understand. What you have is rare. Special. It would be a crime not to nurture it properly. Teresa handed her a card, too. Same here. We'll work out the details, but I'm serious about funding your education and living expenses. No strings attached. I've been supporting artists for 30 years, and I know potential when I see it. Other people pressed cards into her hands. So many cards. Names and phone numbers and promises. The recording executive. A talent manager, someone who owned a music venue, a journalist who wanted to write about her story. It was dizzying. Through the crowd, Maria caught sight of her supervisor, the man who managed the serving staff. He was standing near the back of the ballroom, watching everything with wide eyes. When he saw her looking, he just shook his head in amazement and gave her a small thumbs up. Isabella appeared beside her again, gently steering her away from the crowd. Come on, she said softly. Let's get you some air. You look like you might pass out. Maria let herself be led off the stage and toward a quiet corner of the ballroom. Her legs felt weak. Her hands were shaking again, but for completely different reasons than before. The stack of business cards felt heavy in her pocket. Is this real? She asked Isabella, her voice barely a whisper. Did that really just happen? Isabella smiled, and there were tears in her eyes, too. It really did. You walked onto that stage a server, and you're walking off it as something else entirely. She squeezed Maria's hand. Your life just changed, dear. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Maria looked back at the piano, still sitting there under the spotlight. Then she looked at the crowd of wealthy, powerful people who were still discussing her, planning, organizing. She thought about her grandmother, about that tiny living room where she'd learned to play, about the cheap keyboard in her apartment, about all the years she'd spent believing her dreams were impossible. Maybe they weren't impossible after all. Maybe they were just waiting for the right moment to become real. The next 3 weeks felt like living in someone else's life. Maria kept expecting to wake up and find out the whole thing had been a dream, that she was still just a server with a cheap keyboard and impossible dreams. But it wasn't a dream. The business cards were real. The phone calls were real. And when Vicente Alvarez himself showed up at her tiny apartment to discuss her enrollment at the conservatory, that was definitely real. He'd looked around her cramped studio, taking in the worn furniture and the electronic keyboard squeezed between her bed and the small kitchen counter. He'd sat on her only chair and told her that she'd been accepted to the National Conservatory with a full scholarship starting the following month. No entrance exam needed. No audition required. Her performance at the gala had been audition enough. Teresa had been true to her word, too. She'd set up a fund that would cover Maria's living expenses for the next 4 years. Rent, food, books, everything. "You need to focus on music," she'd said during their meeting at an expensive cafe that Maria had only ever walked past before. "Not on whether you can pay your electric bill." The recording executive, Rafael, had backed off a bit after Teresa's sharp words at the gala, but he'd still reached out with a more respectful proposal. Not an album right away, but maybe some recordings of her practice sessions, building an audience gradually. "When you're ready," he'd said. "No pressure. But the world should hear you play." The hardest part had been telling her family. Her mother had cried, overwhelmed with pride and relief that her daughter wouldn't have to work 3 jobs like she did. Her father, a quiet man who rarely showed emotion, had hugged her so tight she couldn't breathe. "Your abuela would be so proud," he'd whispered, and that had made Maria cry too. Quitting her job at the Palazzo Estrella had felt strange. Her supervisor had shaken her hand and told her he'd known she was destined for better things. "You were always too talented to be refilling water glasses," he'd said, which made Maria laugh because he'd never seen her do anything but refill water glasses until that night. Her co-workers had thrown her a small party in the break room, crowding into that cramped space with cheap champagne and a grocery store cake. They'd all signed a card with encouraging messages. "Don't forget us when you're famous," someone had written. Another person had simply drawn a piano with a heart. These people, who worked just as hard as she did for just as little recognition, were genuinely happy for her. That meant more than all the wealthy patrons and their promises. The first day at the conservatory was terrifying. The building itself was intimidating, all marble columns and high ceilings, like a temple dedicated to music. Students walked the halls carrying expensive instruments in cases that probably cost more than Maria had made in a year of serving. Everyone was younger than her. Most students started at 18, fresh out of high school. Maria was 26, almost a decade older than some of her classmates. She felt out of place in every possible way. But then she'd walked into the practice room Vicente had assigned her, and there it was, a real piano. Not as grand as the Steinway from the gala, but a beautiful upright with rich tone and perfect action. The small room had excellent acoustics and a window that looked out onto a garden. This space was hers, for practicing, for learning, for growing. She'd sat at that piano and cried for 10 minutes before playing a single note. The coursework was brutal. She'd been right to worry about being behind. Music theory, composition, music history. She was years behind her classmates in formal education. She'd never learned to analyze a score properly or understand the mathematical relationships in harmony. Her grandmother had taught her to play by feeling, by intuition, which was beautiful but incomplete. So Maria studied. She studied like her life depended on it because in a way it did. She spent hours in the library, catching up on everything she should have learned at 18. Her classmates would find her there past midnight, surrounded by textbooks, her eyes red from exhaustion. Some students resented her. They'd heard about the server who played at a gala and got a free ride into the conservatory. She didn't even have to audition, she'd overheard someone say in the hallway. The rest of us worked for years to get in here, and she just gets handed everything. That stung, but Maria understood it. From their perspective, she had gotten lucky. They didn't know about the 20 years of practice, the nights after double shifts, the dreams deferred. They just saw someone who'd skipped the line they'd all waited in. But her teachers saw something else. They saw someone who practiced more than anyone else, who asked questions constantly, who treated every lesson like it might be her last chance to learn something precious. Vicente told her after a few weeks that she had something many trained musicians lacked: hunger. Technical skill can be taught, he'd said during one of their sessions. But passion, real dedication, that has to come from within. You have it. Don't lose it just because you're finally getting formal training. 6 months into her studies, Maria gave her first official performance. Not at a gala for wealthy donors, but in the conservatory's small recital hall, performing for students and faculty. She'd been terrified all over again, but this time she was better prepared. She'd chosen a program carefully: Bach, Beethoven, and Chopin. Classic pieces that would demonstrate her technical growth while still allowing her emotional interpretation to shine through. The performance went well, not perfect. She'd stumbled slightly in the Beethoven, but honest and heartfelt. The applause afterward was genuine, and several faculty members had approached her with praise and constructive feedback. One older professor, a woman who'd been performing for 40 years, had simply said, "You're going to be special. Keep working." The recording with Raphael happened in her second year. Just one album, carefully curated. They'd recorded it in a beautiful old church with perfect acoustics, spending a week getting everything just right. Raphael had been professional and respectful, never pushing her toward something commercial or cheap. The album was simply called Maria, and the cover was a photo of her hands on piano keys. It didn't become a massive hit or anything. Classical music rarely did in the modern world, but it sold steadily, and reviews were glowing. One critic wrote, "Maria Gonzalez plays with a rare combination of technical precision and raw emotional honesty. Her interpretation of Chopin's nocturnes in particular reveals depths that more celebrated pianists often miss." More importantly, the album created opportunities. She was invited to perform at small venues, then larger ones, concert halls in other cities, a music festival overseas. Each performance built her reputation as someone worth watching, someone who brought something genuine to classical music in an age when everything often felt manufactured. By her third year at the conservatory, Maria had become something of a legend among the students. Not because she was the most technically skilled. There were prodigies there who could play circles around her, but because of her story, and because she never forgot where she came from. She started teaching on weekends, not at the conservatory, but in the neighborhoods she'd grown up in. She'd partner with community centers and churches, offering free piano lessons to kids who couldn't afford formal instruction. She'd bring her old electronic keyboard, the one she'd practiced on for years, and show them that you didn't need expensive equipment to learn. You just needed desire and dedication. Teresa had been so moved by this that she donated funds to create a proper music program, buying keyboards and hiring additional instructors. They'd named it the Abuela Project in honor of Maria's grandmother, and within a year they had over 50 students. One evening, Maria was invited back to the Palazzo Estrella, not as a server this time, but as the featured performer for their annual gala. She'd walked into that ballroom wearing an elegant concert dress instead of a uniform, and the difference was surreal. Isabella had been there, of course, beaming with pride. "I knew you had something special," she'd said, embracing Maria warmly. "But even I didn't imagine all of this." Many of the same people who'd been there that first night were in attendance. The elderly woman with the diamonds, Vicente and Teresa, even some of the servers who'd worked alongside Maria years ago. Isabella had invited them as guests this time. Maria sat at the same Steinway grand piano, the instrument that had changed her life. Before she played, she took the microphone and spoke to the crowd. 3 years ago, I stood on this stage wearing a different uniform and living a different life, she said, her voice steady and clear. I was invisible to most of you, just part of the background, but one person saw me. Senora Isabella Cortez asked me a simple question. Can you play? And when I said yes, she gave me a chance. She paused, looking around the room. We all have talents, dreams we've pushed aside because life got in the way. And we all share this world with people whose potential we might never see, because we're not really looking at them. The servers here tonight, they might be artists, or writers, or inventors. We don't know because we never ask. Several people in the audience shifted uncomfortably, but many nodded in agreement. So I want to dedicate tonight's performance to everyone who's still waiting for their chance, still practicing in the dark, still believing that somehow, someday, things might be different. Don't give up. Keep playing your keyboards. Keep dreaming your dreams, because you never know when someone might finally ask the right question. The applause that followed was different from that first night. It wasn't just appreciation for good music. It was recognition of a larger truth. Then Maria played. She played the same Chopin nocturne that had started everything, but this time it sounded different. More mature, more nuanced. She'd grown as a musician, but more importantly, she'd grown as a person. When she finished her program, an hour of the most beautiful music she could offer, the standing ovation lasted for several minutes. But the moment Maria treasured most came after, when one of the young servers approached her nervously. "Excuse me, Miss Gonzalez," the girl said quietly. "I'm a painter. I've been working here for 2 years and I paint in my apartment at night. Do you think... is it possible that something like what happened to you could happen to someone like me?" Maria took both of the girl's hands in hers and smiled. "What's your name?" "Lucia." "Lucia, let me tell you something my grandmother taught me. Talent isn't rare. Opportunity is rare. But if you keep working, keep believing, keep showing up, eventually those two things meet. And when they do, your whole world changes." She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "This is Teresa's information. Tell her I sent you. She supports artists of all kinds. Show her your work." Lucia's eyes filled with tears. Thank you so much." As Maria watched the girl walk away, clutching that card like it was made of gold, she felt something shift inside her. This was what it all meant. Not the performances or the recognition or even the music itself. It was about opening doors that had been closed, about being the person who asked the right question at the right time. She was no longer invisible. But more importantly, she was making sure others didn't have to stay invisible either. That night, driving home to her new apartment, small but comfortable with room for a real piano, Maria thought about how strange life could be. One moment can change everything. One question, one chance, one person who decides to really see you. She thought about her grandmother, who had planted the seed all those years ago in that tiny living room, and she smiled, knowing that seed had grown into something neither of them could have imagined. The piano had given her a voice. Now she was using that voice to help others find theirs. And that, she realized, was the real performance, the one that mattered most.